The fishermen of the Philippines have long won their living from a coral sea renowned as one of the finest treasure houses of marine life in the world. They've learned how to take that treasure in many ways. Some ways are now illegal. Dynamiting to stun or kill fish for food damages the very reefs that nurture the fish. But the law is easily flouted, and there's a pressing need for food. Manila's increasingly crowded market reflects the paradox. From this richest of fishing grounds, the catch is no longer enough to go round. This nation is rushing into the new century with already double the number of people there were 20 years ago. But for how long can the produce of the land and the sea sustain the 58 million who crowd this tropical paradise? These people, their forests and the coral reefs seem caught in a triangle of need. Sometimes called the Malay Triangle, this imaginary boundary defines seas thought to be a cradle of evolution for corals and other marine life in exceptional variety. Each of the 7,000 islands that make up the Philippines is encompassed by a fringe of reef, the work of 400 kinds of coral over tens of thousands of years. Some islands are uninhabited. Others seem to overflow with humanity. The land area of this island nation is only a sixth of its extensive underwater realm. These people must make their living on the coral reef a stone's throw from the door. As a natural supermarket, the living reef is unsurpassable. It's a place of breathtaking beauty and nearly always open. Customers are greeted by a rich selection of potentially tasty meals. Of course, as well as a food store, there's a jewelry department. All around are precious, semi-precious and simple ornamental stones, just there for the taking. There'll be no checkout to pass through, and all that's taken may be consumed personally or sold to others. Its greatest virtue has always been that this store is self-stocking. It's under natural management that's held good for tens of thousands of years. But recently, that management has been breaking down. The customers can upset the ancient routine of this store. But it's often only when this supermarket begins to close that its remarkable qualities become recognized and truly valued. So, what can be done when such catastrophe occurs? First, it's essential to know how the reef is built, how the many different corals live, grow, and multiply, and how the enormous diversity of plants and animals share this extraordinary undersea world. It's a world of unlikely partnerships. Clownfish safely fooling immune to the deadly tentacles of anemones. They should be eaten by the anemone, but it's deceived by mucus on their skin, and they enjoy scraps and shelter. It's a world of camouflage, where octopuses matched to the coral can mate secretly in crevices. In the same way, the frogfish, a kind of angler, becomes so like an outcrop of living coral that tiny larvae from the coral polyp settle on it, as though intent on turning it into a part of the solid reef. And to many of the 2,000 or so kinds of reef fish, this is real estate, jealously defended with warning colours, just as this blenny is reminding the approaching poison-spined lionfish that it has an equally poisonous bite. From the paint box of evolution have come patterns, shapes and colours that fit these keen-sighted, agile fish into the fabric of the reef. But theirs can be a fatal attraction. Caught and sold to the aquarium trade abroad, such living jewels are worth £6 million a year to the Philippine economy. But it's a trade that can kill the very source of its prosperity. These men know what they're about to do is both illegal and dangerous. But masked from the sun rather than identification, they set about preparing a solution of sodium cyanide. They intend to use it as an anesthetic, but it's a deadly poison. At the diver's approach, the fish hide deep within the reef. He can only squirt the cyanide at random over the coral heads. The technique is crude, but what the fisherman regards as its magic works. A large net placed around the coral head will contain the helpless fish drifting out of hiding. They're more than asleep. The paralyzing poison will affect their livers, their ability to reproduce, and their respiration, and can induce a kind of goiter. In the manner of practiced jewel thieves, the divers select fish that will fetch the highest prices. Time and again they spread the poison until satisfied that the most valuable fish have been taken. Fish that they know won't sell will be fed to their families, sometimes with ill effect. The cyanide kills many of the fish at once, and only a few of the survivors will ever reach a pet shop. The sodium cyanide solution is also known to kill the living coral, and although that's not the major cause of the current destruction of Philippine reefs, the use of this technique was forbidden in 1972. A controversial decision on a locally sensitive issue. It threatened the livelihood and survival of many island fishermen. The law has not been enforced. Some 2,000 collectors still work in this way. The legal method recommended is to use hand nets only, but the fishermen believe that lets the best fish get away. It's thought that 80% of tropical fish exported from the Philippines are caught by unlawful means. That, in the light of recent research, can only be long-term bad news for the corals, the fish, and the fishermen themselves. One lionfish looks very much like another. It's worth £1 or more to these men, but more than £60 by the time it reaches Europe, America, or elsewhere around the globe. But how is the shopkeeper here in downtown San Francisco to know whether his recent arrival is from a legal source? With as many as 3 out of every 4 marine fish for sale here coming from the Philippines, the proprietor must be sure his supplier is obtaining fish caught only by hand netting. Since 1987, a non-profit-making organization in the Philippines, known as the International Marine Life Alliance, has been training many local collectors in the harmless technique. The alliance has the blessing of the government of the Philippines, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and the aquarium trade. None of these fish is likely to die suddenly of delayed cyanide poisoning. And it's not in the shopkeeper's interest to see his customers returning to the store with the ailing victims of an illegal trade. The supply of healthy fish from healthy reefs is thought to be sustainable, and that should be good news for customers worldwide and for fishermen in the Philippines. But in the long history of the exploitation of their reefs, creatures other than fish have challenged the courage and skill of Filipinos. These are banded sea snakes. There are 15 kinds of sea snake on these reefs. All are venomous. Those most likely to kill a diver have venom 10 times more potent than a cobra's. They have small mouths and are said to bite a man only with difficulty, but they're handled with extreme care. The main enemies of sea snakes are sharks, but the divers have gathered them in such numbers that now 3 kinds are locally extinct while others are rare. It's their skins that are their misfortune. On a good day, one diver could contribute 50 snakes to be skinned in Manila. There was a time when hundreds of thousands would pass through these vats in a single month. Salting the skins helps preserve them and keeps them from becoming brittle. The factory no longer receives sufficient skins to meet the demand. In only 5 years, the number has fallen to about 1/10 of what it was. The salting, followed by hours of drying, fades the natural colours, but high fashion dictates the use of dyes. Here there are snakes all the colours of the rainbow. It'll take the skins of 7 snakes to make 1 handbag and a matching pair of shoes. The price? More than one diver will earn in a year. The real cost, the loss of the snakes from the reef. Sea shells from the Philippines must have been sold around the world in astronomical numbers. Their beauty, fashioned by their discarded animal architects, has fascinated people since long before recorded history. As ornaments, objets d'art, and even a form of currency, they are strung through our lives. "5,000 snails are sacrificed to make just one of these shell chandeliers. But officially, it's thought this art and trade in shells need not be destructive or discouraged if it's carefully controlled. The women and children gather the shells at low tide. It's often the only way they can contribute to the cash income of the family. Shellfish reproduce in superabundance, but there is a danger in the repeated trampling of the reef by the gleaners themselves. This can upset the more sensitive and fragile reef animals and the living coral itself. The pursuit of larger, valuable shellfish is a task for the young men. They hunt through the coral heads in these shallow offshore waters. It's a job that requires many hands, but labour is cheap here, and as the battalions of divers grow, so more shells are taken each year for the growing world market. This cone shell may soon be on sale at a shop near you. The taking of shells does have an impact on the reef community. Many of these mollusks are predators. Their removal increases the numbers of their prey. The natural balance of the reef life can be disturbed in unpredictable and sometimes disastrous ways. These nets were put down baited in much deeper water several days ago. The catch of shellfish would include some that have long been taken as food. But now the fisherman has a quick eye for the cash value of the shells. There is, as yet, no official regulation of such collecting, but each year the men notice they must fish further offshore to fill their nets. Organisations concerned for the future of reefs know this industry needs control, but they're more alarmed by this: the collection and export of coral itself. It's been illegal since 1977, but every year at least 1,000 tons of coral is sold abroad. The United States, it's believed, imports illegally more than half the market in Philippine coral. The other half, presumably, still finds a way into other countries who are equally legally bound to prevent its entry. It takes thousands of years to grow. Broken and poisoned reefs take generations to recover. A heritage is being squandered. As and when the shell trade is regulated, will it show the same indifference to enforcement? If so, there could be little hope for the larger, long-lived molluscs, such as triton, a favourite trinket for tourists. Its role on the reef is that of predator. It can even take on and eat the formidable and notorious crown-of-thorns starfish. Over-collection of triton shells is one suggested reason for the mysterious population explosions of the crown-of-thorns. The huge starfish consumes the living polyps of the coral and can devastate whole reefs. But whether its plagues are artificially induced by our removal of predators or are natural phenomena remains to be explained. Certainly in this meeting of giants, it's the voracious, poison-spined, supposed arch-villain of the reef that will retreat on its many tube feet. The triton sails like a galleon into battle, curling its proboscis in amongst the fleshy spines. One of the triton's weapons is its mouth. The rasping teeth can grip the spines. It needs to take firm hold to wield in the main armour, its shell. The large single muscular foot on which it advances will now contract and bring the heavy shell down onto the starfish. Triton is only after a meal. Its victory is an incidental defence of the reef. The starfish must retreat and will sacrifice this limb in the escape. There are other, more deliberate defenders of the reef, attacking from between the branches of the coral. The underbelly of the invader is vulnerable to the prodding and snipping of a tiny crab known as a coral guard. It lives in alliance with the coral, repaying the hospitality by repelling boarders. The crabs are useful Davids in the face of so many Goliaths. Such intimate and intriguing partnerships may escape our notice, hidden among the spectacle of grace and colour. A reef is one of the richest communities of life known, a wealth that, if only sustained, we all can share. These young boys are going fishing. The catching of fish is paramount to the survival of the Philippine people. The technique of which they're a key part is called muru ami. It means chamber net. It was introduced here in the 1940s by Japanese fishermen who devised it to exploit the sharp coral reefs where ordinary trawls can't work. Essentially, it's the task of the children to scare the fish down current to a net at the other end of the reef. Each of the 250 boys holds a long scare line loaded with a rock and flagged with white plastic streamers, effectively creating an advancing wall whose sight and sound drives the fish towards the distant waiting chamber net, already anchored to the coral and open. The pounding of rocks scares fish out of hiding, but also smashes the fragile coral heads. The reef is scoured of everything that moves over its surface. All will be swallowed into the giant bag that is Muruwami. With only one gulp of air in their lungs, these divers experience at least 3 long minutes, 80 feet deep. Timing is critical. The net must be raised before the fish turn and escape, but it must be carefully disentangled from the reef. Even large fish, such as the white-tipped shark, rush into this trap. There'll be nothing left on this reef. Nearly desperate for air, some boys in the net must patiently file out through the single marked opening. Every day they risk their lives like this on 10 sweeps of the reef. The whole operation has taken about an hour, and it's only the third catch of the morning. 7 other reefs will be preyed upon and swept clean of their life before the end of the day. A reef takes many years to recover from such plundering, and there are 30 of these vessels operating illicitly. It was declared illegal in 1986. More and more they must move further out into the South China Sea, not only to seek these riches on untouched, distant reefs, but to fish where the laws against Muruwami are not easily enforced. It was the excessive and indiscriminate nature of the catch, as well as the dangerous exploitation of the children, that led to official condemnation of Muruwami. But in a country with so great a population in need of food and where labor is cheap, the profit is tempting. The older men tend to the nets and sort and stow the catch. 50 tubs will be filled after each dive. The young boys are the divers and fishermen. They all share the profits. The most valuable fish will be kept packed in ice until a major port is reached. The not-so-choice fish are salted and festooned around the ship to dry. These will bring in additional income from island villages passed during the 10 months at sea. Even with your eyes closed, you can never forget there are fish on board. The crew of 500 people, usually all the healthy males between 7 years and 70 from one village, can expect to earn about 20% of the boat's income on the long, arduous voyage. For the children between 7 and 15, that's about 60 pence a day, average for the Philippines. And the employer prefers them because they can survive in less space, eat less, drink less, and do not complain at the wage for a job that can and does kill. The older men do the cooking as well as their other duties. The meals, as might be expected, are fish, but with the addition of rice. There's no shortage of protein in the diet, but the meals are also a source of epidemic dysentery. These illegal voyages call to mind the slave ships of ages past. The youngsters only survive through youthful vitality and amazing spirit. But for the 15,000 people known to depend on Muruwami, it remains a necessary evil. A difficulty facing those in charge of managing the marine resources of these increasingly crowded islands is getting the message across, making the people in the streets aware that their most precious and vital source of food from the sea is being destroyed, that in the long term this cannot improve the welfare of families in the cities or in outlying islands. In the markets of Manila, the price of maya-maya, lapu-lapu and tangingi is soaring. In English, they're snapper, grouper and Spanish mackerel, just 3 of the wide selection of edible fish among the 2,000 species in Philippine seas. By far the greatest catch of fish is that of subsistence fishermen in far-off villages and islands. Apart from 1 or 2 communities, biologists are finding it hard to convince such needy people that they ought to think of future generations, to set aside some of their reefs as sanctuaries that would naturally restock and sustain the reefs they fish. Instead, the destruction of the reefs goes on. Dynamited, poisoned, quarried and sold. As biologists tell you in the Philippines, nowhere else have reefs been abused as much as they have been in these waters, either directly or indirectly. The felling of the rainforest and the building of roads to move the timber has had profound effect on the coral reefs. There was a time when these islands were thick with forest as magnificent and rich as the reefs offshore. 2/3 have already been cleared, and vast tracts of the rest vanish legally and otherwise every year. Without the forest to absorb the monsoon rains, soil washes to the sea. People also clear land by slashing and burning, and they're now so numerous and hungry they've moved to poorer hill country, since the best land is in use by the few major landowners to grow sugarcane and coconuts. From this poor soil, it's an effort to scratch even a meager living. Irrigation is of the simplest kind. To keep a pig is a luxury. With half the population living below the poverty line, to own such a farm is relative wealth. Many people must work as seasonal labourers on the larger farms to earn money to buy food for the family in the local market. Some of these people may come from families that once owned land, which generation by generation was subdivided among so many children that it can no longer support them. These are critical times in the Philippines. For the sake of the children, major reforms and plans for the future are being suggested. The people have heard their president, Corazon Aquino, state plainly that the protection and conservation of the life support systems of the Philippine seas, including the mangroves, the seagrasses and the coral reefs, are vital to her program of government. So there is an official commitment to combat reef destruction, such as this choking cloud of silt washing from the eroded land. It smothers living corals. The natural resources of our seas, the President has said, are beautiful and productive. Let us not destroy them. Action is already being taken to assess the extent and nature of the damage. Practical reef recovery work has started in combined operations between Philippine organizations and overseas agencies. Here, both local divers and personnel from a private research organization in California and volunteers from the American Peace Corps confront an all-too-common problem. Trawlers have been fishing too close to this reef, and these nets lost overboard have been irresponsibly abandoned. The nets continue a sinister fishing of their own, trapping and killing to the benefit of no one but the scavengers. But this is a straightforward problem, the kind easily seen, and with a little muscle power and experienced diving technique, efficiently coped with. The more subtle problems, the decline of the fisheries, the disappearance of individual kinds of animal, the death of the reefs, need all the research skills that can be mustered. In this open-air laboratory at the University of the Philippines, a team of marine biologists is tackling the problem of the disappearing giant clams. The clams in these pens are about the size of your hand. Adults exceed 3 feet in length and weigh as much as a man. Their huge shells and their meat are desirable products of the reef, and they've been overexploited. Dr. Edgardo Gomez is supervising an attempt at restoration, as well as actively crusading for the salvation of the reefs he knows are essential to the future well-being of the people. In underwater pens, the hand-sized clams will be allowed to grow until a foot long. A diary of their growth shows them to be in no great hurry, and they'll need protection from predators and poachers in this nursery fortress. The hope is that when placed in the wild, these clams will spawn and so recolonize the reefs naturally. Some, already at the right size, have been set out on the reef, and the students and researchers in Gomez's team are monitoring these pioneers carefully in their first year in their natural home. They're intriguing shellfish, and not only for their giant size. Their tissues are green with tiny cells of algae that live in partnership with the mollusk on the sunny reef. There's a mutual exchange of foods made by the algae for shelter given by the clam. A similar delicate partnership exists between corals and the microscopic algae in their tissues. Healthy, flourishing reefs do still exist. This one, off the island of Sumilon, was made a reserve, not to attract tourism, though that's a future prospect for several places, but to wrest this reef from intensive fishing. The local islanders were impressed that the numbers of fish of all kinds increased. They could see that by giving up some of their catch now, they can be sure their descendants will have self-sustaining reefs to fish. But the animals of the reef also have a value for the world. There are natural medicines to be found here, just as in tropical forests. This sea slug lays a rosette of eggs in jelly. They're known to contain a substance active against some human cancers. There's a diversity of sea slugs, so who knows what other chemicals they might contain. Investigation of the sea squirts has already resulted in the testing of a new and more potent drug to prevent tissue rejection in organ transplant surgery. And in the bodies of sponges, they hide clues to the synthesis of chemicals that might bring relief to sufferers from arthritis. The search has really only just begun, not just for medicines, but for natural pesticides and herbicides less persistent on land. It can be done with minimum disturbance to the reef. Very few animals need be collected. The value lies in the continued existence of this natural pharmacy in the sea. There's a new pattern to the life of some Filipino fishermen. Many have been encouraged to farm fish in these huge pens. Aquaculture is one way of relieving the pressure of too many people using the reefs. Here, inland at Laguna, there's the largest of these fish farming communities. This is Enrique Toma. He's been a fisherman all his life, but as the reefs in Manila Bay degenerated, he decided to make a new start and to learn how to breed and raise an imported fish from Africa called tilapia. Remarkably, although it's a freshwater fish, it's taken to the brackish water. Enrique and his family live over the shop. From their house on stilts, they can watch for poachers of their aquatic livestock. They're doing well at this new fishing venture, already employing helpers from nearby villages, and so extending their own prosperity to the wider community. Twice a month, Enrique gathers his harvest, and everyone helps. The tilapia grow rapidly, a natural fast food. They've been called the chicken of the sea. Of all the fish consumed in the Philippines, 10% is supplied by these farms. Aquaculture is another approach to restoring the balance between the needs of these people, their land, and the still mysterious reefs of coral. Only recently have the corals divulged their best-kept secret. Just 2 days after the full moon of November, about 2 hours after sunset, when parrotfish are asleep in cocoons of mucus, and a cornetfish makes its evening round, the hard corals of the reef are poised, ready to spawn. But it will only happen when the time, the tide, and the warmth of the sea are exactly right. Some coral heads release only sperm, which drift up to meet eggs released from elsewhere. Already the whole reef is beginning to erupt in a mass orgy of reproduction. From the polyps of this coral, bundles containing both egg and sperm are being released. They'll float to the surface where they'll break apart in the waves. A 120 or more different kinds of coral together release their blizzard of renewed life into the sea. It's one of the greatest synchronized natural mass events known in the animal kingdom. Somehow, many of the eggs will be found and fertilized by the appropriate sperm, and the resulting larvae of the various corals will drift, perhaps for weeks, before settling and growing to extend the delicate sculpture of the reef. As the orgy progresses, the sea becomes a nutritious soup. Fish, worms, and other animals are attracted to the frenzy, but are quickly satisfied by the glut of food. And that may be a strategy of the corals. It ensures that some of them will survive. It's perhaps a measure of our ignorance of reefs that so extraordinary a mass event that's probably pulsed regularly through the seas on cue for millions of years has only just been discovered. These coral reefs are a climax of 450 million years of evolution. It's within our power to benefit from whatever miracles they presently hide. We are the first generation to cross the threshold of this world with ease. But in so doing, we've become the first animal of the reef with the power to abuse its beauty and destroy its virtue. Surely, we do so at our peril.